The night my family called my granddaughter a disgrace for marrying a Mexican man, my son raised a glass and said, "At least the mistake ends with her." 7 years later, he walked into her restaurant and begged for the best table in the house. "Hello? Glad you're with me tonight. Tell me honestly, if your own family crossed a line like that, would you forgive them later or let them live with it?" I was 71 the night my family decided blood mattered less than appearances. You'd think by that age nothing could still surprise a woman. I'd buried a husband, survived 2 hurricanes, once chased a raccoon out of my pantry with a cast-iron skillet while wearing curlers and 1 slipper. But watching my own son smile politely while humiliating his daughter in front of roast duck and crystal wine glasses, that one lodged itself somewhere deep. The dinner was held at Bradley's house outside Charleston, in one of those gated neighborhoods where every lawn looked shaved with surgical precision. Even the hydrangeas seemed judgmental there. Elaine had spent the whole afternoon preparing the dining room like a magazine spread. Ivory candles, folded linen napkins, tiny gold name cards nobody actually needed. I arrived carrying a pecan pie still warm from the oven. Elaine opened the door, air kissed my cheek, then immediately whispered, "Mom, please don't mention politics tonight, or immigration, or religion." I stared at her. Well, there goes every conversation topic after 60. She forced a laugh, but her eyes kept darting toward the driveway. That's when I saw why. Lena stepped out of a dusty blue Chevrolet beside a tall young man in a white button-down shirt, holding a pink bakery box with both hands, like he didn't want to arrive empty-handed. He looked nervous, but not weak. Calm, nervous. Respectful, nervous. "Grandma," Lena smiled the second she saw me. Now that girl had always smiled with her whole face, even as a child, when she lost her first tooth, when she burned pancakes at 13 and tried to hide them in the azalea bushes, when she got accepted into culinary school and cried in the grocery store parking lot because she thought nobody noticed how hard she'd worked. But that night, her smile had strain behind it. "This is Mateo," she said softly. Bradley walked onto the porch before I could answer. "Marcus, right?" "Mateo," the young man corrected gently, offering his hand. Bradley shook it like he was touching damp laundry. Inside, the air smelled like rosemary lamb, expensive perfume, and tension. Portia sat at the table already scrolling through her phone with those glossy acrylic nails tapping like little hammers. Aunt Darlene Pike wore enough jewelry to sink a fishing boat and eyed Mateo the same way old women inspect bruised peaches at the market. Mateo placed the bakery box carefully beside the wine bottles. "My mother made pan dulce this morning," he said. "I hope everybody likes sweet bread." Elaine smiled too quickly. "Oh, how authentic." I saw Lena's shoulders tighten immediately. That was the thing about family cruelty. Outsiders think it starts with screaming. It doesn't. It starts with tiny cuts, little elegant knives wrapped in manners. Dinner began quietly enough. Bradley talked about property taxes. Portia complained about airport security. Darlene launched into a story about her Pilates instructor dating a man 20 years younger. Every few minutes, someone would toss Mateo a question that wasn't really a question. "So where are your people from originally? How long has your family been in this country? You speak English amazingly well." That last one nearly made me choke on my tea because the boy had less accent than half the men fishing off Sullivan's Island. But Mateo stayed composed. "Yes, ma'am?" "No, ma'am." "Thank you, sir." Not once did he rise to the bait. And Lena kept watching everyone like she was waiting for a storm cloud to finally burst open. Then came the moment. Elaine had just served the bourbon-glazed carrots when Lena set down her fork and cleared her throat. "We actually invited everyone tonight because we have news." Portia muttered, "Oh, God," under her breath. Lena ignored it. Mateo reached for her hand beneath the table. "We're getting married next month." Silence. Not loud silence. Worse. The kind where silverware stops moving. Darlene blinked 3 times. Bradley leaned back slowly in his chair. Elaine froze with the wine bottle halfway lifted. Portia laughed first. Not a happy laugh. One sharp little exhale through the nose. "You're serious?" Lena nodded. "Yes." Mateo smiled carefully. "I already asked her grandmother for her blessing." Now that surprised Bradley enough to look at me. "You knew about this?" "I did," I answered calmly. "And you encouraged it?" "I encouraged happiness," I said. Seemed simpler. Elaine finally sat down. "Lena, sweetheart, marriage is a very big step." "It is," Lena replied quietly. Bradley folded his napkin with painful precision. That man always folded things when he was angry. Bills, newspaper corners, funeral pamphlets. I'd watched him do it since he was 12 years old. "And what exactly does Mateo do again?" "I'm finishing my apprenticeship under Chef Alvarez downtown," Mateo answered. "The restaurant by the marina?" I asked. His face brightened instantly. "Yes, ma'am." "That place has the best shrimp stock in Charleston." "Thank you," he said, smiling genuinely for the first time all evening. Bradley took a sip of wine. "So the plan is what? Lena cooks enchiladas while you run some food truck?" Lena's face dropped immediately. Mateo opened his mouth, but I spoke first. "Bradley." "What?" he snapped. "I'm asking practical questions." "No," I said evenly. "You're trying to embarrass your daughter." Portia rolled her eyes. "Mom's not wrong, though. This whole thing feels rushed." "We've been together 3 years," Lena said. Elaine suddenly straightened. 3 years? Now that caught my attention, too. "You told us to," she added sharply. Lena hesitated half a second too long, and suddenly, I understood. They'd hidden part of the relationship because they already knew exactly how this family would react. That realization sat bitter on my tongue. Darlene leaned toward Elaine and whispered something that included the words, "those people," not nearly as quietly as she thought. Mateo heard it too. I could tell because his jaw tightened for the first time all evening. But he still stayed polite. Still stayed calm. That's what broke my heart most. The boy came into that house trying so hard to earn dignity from people who had already decided not to give him any. Then Bradley leaned back in his chair, swirling bourbon in his glass. And with the calmest voice in the world, he said, "We built this family carefully, Lena. Don't throw your future away because you got swept up in some little cultural fantasy." The room went still again. Lena looked like she'd been slapped. And that was the exact moment I realized this dinner wasn't about concern. It was about punishment. Nobody touched their food after that. Even the candles seemed nervous. Lena stared down at her plate while Mateo sat perfectly still beside her, one hand resting near his water glass, the other under the table holding hers. I noticed little things at my age. The way his thumb rubbed against her knuckles. The way she kept swallowing hard before speaking. Young people think old women miss details. Lord, details are all we notice anymore. Elaine tried to rescue the atmosphere first. Well, she said with a brittle smile, I think everybody's just surprised. No, Bradley answered before anyone else could speak. I'm concerned. Concerned. That word has hidden more cruelty than profanity ever invented. Lena lifted her head. About what exactly? Your future. My future is sitting right here. Bradley exhaled sharply through his nose. You're 26 years old. You barely finished culinary school. He works in kitchens 12 hours a day. You think that's stability? Mateo finally spoke. Calm. Controlled. With respect, sir, kitchens are how I plan to build stability. Darlene gave a tiny laugh into her wine glass. Well, ambition is nice. I almost asked her when exactly she'd developed such strong opinions on work, considering she'd lived off 3 divorces and a dead chiropractor husband. But I held my tongue. For the moment. Portia leaned back in her chair. So where are you two even planning to live? We found an apartment near Rutledge Avenue, Lena said. The tiny brick ones? Portia asked. Yes. With the bars on the windows? Mateo answered this time. They're temporary. Mm-hmm. That girl could put poison into 2 letters. I looked toward Lena again. She was trying so hard to remain composed that it hurt me to watch. Her cheeks had gone pink the way they used to when she was little, and trying not to cry after falling off her bicycle. Then Elaine made the mistake that changed the entire evening. She smiled at Mateo and said, I'm sure your family must be thrilled. Big weddings are important in your culture, right? Now maybe another person would miss what sat underneath that sentence. I didn't, and Lena didn't either. What does that mean? She asked quietly. Elaine blinked. Nothing bad, honey. No, Lena replied. Say what you mean. Bradley set down his glass harder than necessary. Don't start twisting people's words. I'm not twisting anything, Lena shot back. Everybody's been talking to us like we're making some embarrassing mistake since we walked in. Because maybe you are, Portia muttered. The room snapped tight. Mateo immediately turned toward Lena. We can leave if you want. And that right there told me more about his character than the rest of the table combined. Not angry, not defensive, protective. Lena shook her head slowly. No, I'm tired of leaving rooms to make people comfortable. Bradley laughed once, short and cold. You think this is about comfort? This is about reality. What reality? The reality that marriages like this are hard. Marriages like what? Lena asked. Nobody answered immediately. Because cowards love implications until somebody asks them to speak plainly. Finally, Bradley said it. Different worlds rarely last. Mateo looked him directly in the eye. My parents have been married 34 years. That's not what I meant. I know, Mateo replied. That silence afterward could have cracked marble. Darlene reached for her wine again. Honestly, people are too sensitive nowadays. Nobody's saying anything racist. There it was. The word nobody wanted spoken aloud, because once it entered the room, everybody had to look at themselves honestly. Elaine rubbed her temples dramatically. Can we please not turn this into one of those conversations? One of what conversations? I asked calmly. You know what I mean, Celia. No, I answered. I really don't. Bradley pushed his chair back slightly. Mother, stop escalating things. I looked at my son for a long moment. And suddenly I remembered him at 8 years old, crying because another boy excluded him from a birthday party. He'd stood in our kitchen asking why people acted cruel for no reason. Funny how age changes some people and reveals others. Mateo reached into the pink bakery box quietly. My mama still wanted everybody to have these, he said softly. She woke up at 4 making conchas. Nobody moved. The poor boy had brought peace offerings into a war zone. I picked one up immediately. Well, I said, taking a bite, if heaven has bread, this is probably what they serve. Mateo smiled despite everything. Lena nearly did too. But Bradley ruined it. He leaned back in his chair, stared directly at his daughter, and said, "You're willing to throw away your entire family for this?" Lena answered without hesitation. "No. You're the ones making me choose." That landed harder than anybody expected. Even Bradley looked caught off guard. And for the first time that night, I saw uncertainty flicker across Elaine's face. Because deep down, they all knew something ugly was happening at that table. And worse, they knew I was watching it happen. The dinner should have ended there. A normal family would have backed off after hearing something like that. Maybe awkwardly changed the subject. Maybe apologized badly over coffee and pie. But my family had always preferred pressure over reflection. Bradley stood and walked toward the bar cart near the fireplace, pouring himself another bourbon he absolutely did not need. The ice clinked hard against the crystal. "You're being dramatic," he muttered. Lena laughed once in disbelief. "Dramatic?" "Yes." "She's not dramatic," Mateo said quietly. "She's hurt." Bradley turned slowly. "I wasn't talking to you." That did it for me. "Then maybe start," I said sharply. The room froze again. Now, I wasn't a loud woman by nature, never had been. My husband, Harlan, used to joke that I could silence a room faster with a whisper than most people could with yelling. But when I spoke like that, my family knew better than to ignore it. Bradley stared at me. "Mother?" "No," I interrupted. "You don't get to dismiss him like he's some stranger who wandered in off the street." "He is a stranger. He's your daughter's fiancé." Bradley took a long sip of bourbon. "For now." Lena physically flinched. That shook me more than his words, because it meant she expected cruelty from her own father. Not feared it, expected it. Elaine finally stood up too. "Everybody needs to calm down." "Oh, now we calm down," I said. Interesting timing. "Celia," she warned softly. I ignored her. Mateo looked exhausted already, and the poor boy had only been in that house an hour. I noticed his untouched plate, the tightness around his eyes. He'd walked in hoping for acceptance, and was slowly realizing this family had invited him to be evaluated, not welcomed. Then Darlene decided to pour kerosene onto the fire. "I just think," she announced while cutting into her lamb, "people should marry within lifestyles they understand." Portia nodded immediately. "Exactly." Lena stared at them. "Lifestyle?" Darlene shrugged. "You grew up differently." "So did you and Uncle Raymond," Lena snapped. "He literally sold fireworks out of a trailer when you met him." Portia snorted into her wine. Darlene's face tightened. "That's not the same thing." "Why not?" Nobody answered, because everybody knew why not. Mateo sat back slightly, finally speaking with less restraint. "You know, my father said something before tonight." Bradley looked annoyed already. "Oh, yeah." "He said sometimes people decide who you are before you even sit down at their table." Silence. Then Mateo added softly, "I didn't believe him." I swear to God, something inside me cracked hearing that. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough. Elaine crossed her arms. "Nobody here hates you, Mateo." "No," Lena said bitterly. "You just hate what marrying him says about me." "That's ridiculous." "Is it?" Lena looked around the table. "Nobody's asked if I'm happy. Nobody." And she was right. Every single question all night had been about embarrassment, money, appearances, background, image, not love, not once. Bradley rubbed his forehead like he was the victim in all this. "Lena, we gave you opportunities your whole life. Good schools, stability, connections, and now you're throwing yourself into—" "What? Say it." He stopped. Mateo looked him dead in the eye, and my son couldn't finish the sentence. That told me everything. Then Portia leaned forward with that poisonous, calm, rich girl's perfect at country clubs. "You're acting like this is some fairy tale romance, Lena, but eventually reality kicks in. Different families have different standards." Lena blinked at her slowly. "Standards." Portia shrugged. "You know what I mean." "No," Lena whispered. "I really don't anymore." That room suddenly felt too small for all the ugliness sitting in it. I stood up and began gathering plates just so my hands had something to do before I said something irreversible. Mateo immediately rose too. "Ms. Renmore, please, let me help." There it was again. Respect. Natural respect. Not performative. Not strategic. Meanwhile, my own son sat there drinking bourbon, while his future son-in-law carried dishes into the kitchen beside a 71-year-old woman. Funny world. Once we reached the kitchen, Mateo quietly picked up a towel and started helping without asking where anything belonged. "I'm sorry about tonight," he said softly. I looked at him carefully. "None of this is your fault." His jaw tightened slightly. "I knew they didn't like me. I just didn't realize how much." The kitchen smelled like garlic, thyme, and burned sugar from the carrots left too long in the oven. Through the doorway, I could still hear low voices from the dining room. Then Mateo surprised me. "I can handle people insulting me," he said quietly while rinsing plates. "But Lena pretending it doesn't hurt her, that part kills me." That sentence stayed with me, because it was the first truly honest thing spoken all evening. And out in that dining room, my family was still trying to figure out how to turn prejudice into something that sounded respectable. When we walked back into the dining room, the conversation stopped so abruptly, it almost sounded rehearsed. Elaine was holding her wine glass too tightly. Bradley had that stiff look around his mouth he always got when he knew he'd gone too far, but wasn't man enough to admit it. Portia pretended to scroll through her phone, though the screen had already gone dark. Lena looked up the second she saw us returning together, and I caught it immediately. Relief. Not because the evening had improved, because Mateo hadn't walked out on her. That realization hit me harder than I expected. My granddaughter had spent the entire night bracing for abandonment from somebody, She just didn't know from whom. I sat down slowly. Mateo remained standing a second longer before taking his seat beside Lena again. Then Bradley cleared his throat. Nobody's saying Mateo is a bad person. There it was. The classic retreat after cruelty. I folded my napkin carefully. Funny how often that sentence appears right after somebody behaves badly. Mother? No. You've all spent 2 hours treating this young man like a contamination risk at a church picnic. Portia groaned softly. Oh my God, Grandma, that's dramatic. Dramatic was your cousin Denise setting her ex-boyfriend's bass boat on fire in Mobile. This is honesty. Even Lena almost smiled at that. Almost. Elaine leaned forward, lowering her voice like she was negotiating a hostage situation. Celia, nobody's attacking anybody. We're worried Lena's making choices emotionally instead of practically. Mateo answered before I could. Most people marry emotionally. That shut the room up again. And the worst part? He wasn't even defensive about it. Just truthful. Bradley pointed toward him slightly with his bourbon glass. Life isn't built on emotions. Now Lena laughed for real. A short, stunned laugh. Seriously? Dad, you bought a boat during a recession because a salesman called it masculine. Darlene coughed hard, trying not to laugh into her napkin. Bradley shot her a glare. You don't understand what marriage becomes after 20 years, he snapped. No, Lena replied quietly. I understand exactly what it becomes if people spend their whole lives caring more about appearances than each other. That one landed clean. Elaine looked furious now. Not loud furious. Worse. Controlled furious. I think, she said carefully, that Lena's confusing rebellion with independence. I'm not rebelling. Then why this sudden rush? Lena blinked slowly. You really still think this is sudden? Nobody answered. Because she was right again. 3 years together. Family dinners skipped because Mateo would probably feel uncomfortable. Invitations quietly excluding him. Every conversation redirected whenever his name came up. This family hadn't ignored the relationship. They'd been slowly trying to suffocate it. Mateo finally spoke again, voice calm but tired. I love your daughter. Bradley immediately replied, Love doesn't pay mortgages. No, Mateo agreed. Work does. That's why I work. There was no arrogance in him, no performance. And somehow that irritated Bradley even more. People like my son understood conflict better than dignity. Dignity confused them. Then Portia leaned toward Lena. Can I ask something honestly? Lena crossed her arms. Depends. Are you really okay giving up everything for this? The room stilled again. Now that sentence was carefully designed. Portia always did that. Wrapped venom in concern like a pharmacy pill. Lena frowned. Everything? You know what I mean. No, Lena said. Say it plainly for once. Portia hesitated. Then Bradley did it for her. If you marry him, things are going to change in this family. There it was. Not a threat shouted in anger. A punishment calmly offered across candlelight. Elaine closed her eyes briefly like she wished he hadn't said it out loud. But honestly, I was glad he did. Because secrets rot families slower than honesty does. Lena looked at her father for a long moment. And I watched my granddaughter's heart break in real time. Not loudly, not theatrically. Just quietly enough for only somebody old to recognize it. "You'd really cut me off," she whispered. Bradley didn't answer immediately, and that hesitation told her the truth before he even spoke. "We'd need distance." Distance. Another polite word people use when they mean rejection. Mateo stood up instantly. "We should go." But Lena didn't move. She stared at her father with tears finally gathering in her eyes. "I kept thinking, if you actually got to know him, things would change." Elaine reached for her hand. "Honey." Lena pulled away immediately. "No," she said softly. "Don't do that now." Nobody breathed. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere far beyond the windows. A summer storm moving over Charleston. I could smell rain coming through the cracked dining room doors mixed with bourbon, lamb grease, and candle smoke. Then Lena looked directly at me. Not at her parents. At me. And in that moment, I realized she wasn't asking for approval anymore. She was asking whether she still had family left at all. I wish I could tell you I stood up right there and delivered some grand speech that shattered the whole room. Life doesn't work like that. Most betrayals happen quietly, and most turning points begin with a single choice nobody else notices. Lena finally stood from the table, smoothing her dress with shaking hands. Mateo moved beside her immediately, close enough to steady her without making a scene. "We should leave," he said softly again. This time she nodded. Not angry, not dramatic, just exhausted. Elaine rose halfway from her chair. "Lena, don't overreact." I actually laughed at that. A small, dry laugh that made everybody look at me. "Elaine," I said calmly, "your husband just implied your daughter stops being family if she gets married. I'd say the reaction's been remarkably restrained." Bradley's jaw tightened. "That's not what I said." "No," Lena whispered. "It's what you meant." She reached for her purse. Mateo picked up the untouched bakery box from the sideboard. That detail nearly broke me. The poor boy was polite enough to take home the pastries his mother had woken up at 4 a.m. to make for people who treated her son like dirt. Then Bradley made the mistake that changed everything. "Lena," he said sharply, "if you walk out right now, don't expect things to stay the same." The room froze. Mateo stopped moving, and I watched my granddaughter slowly turn back toward the table. "You mean financially?" she asked. Nobody answered, which was answer enough. Portia stared down at her phone. Elaine suddenly became very interested in adjusting silverware. Darlene sipped wine like she wished she were somewhere else entirely. Bradley finally sighed. "You know your grandfather's trust has conditions." Ah, there it was. Money. It always crawled out eventually. Now let me explain something. My late husband Harlan had left investment accounts for the grandchildren years earlier. Nothing obscene, but enough to help with homes, businesses, tuition, futures. Bradley controlled distribution until the grandchildren turned 30. And Lena was 26. I looked at my son slowly. You'd use your father's money to control her marriage. I'm protecting family assets. No, I said quietly. You're weaponizing them. Mateo finally spoke, voice low and steady. We don't want your money. Bradley looked almost relieved hearing that. Good. But Lena looked wounded all over again. Not because she wanted the trust, because her father was so eager to take it away. Then she asked the question that changed the entire room. If I married someone named Matthew Collins instead of Matteo Salcedo, would we even be having this conversation? Nobody spoke, not one person. And that silence told the truth cleaner than honesty ever could. Lena nodded slowly, like she finally understood something she'd spent years trying not to see. "Wow," she whispered. Elaine stood quickly. "Honey, it's more complicated than that." "No," Lena replied. "It really isn't." Matteo touched her back gently. "Let's go." This time she didn't hesitate. They started toward the front door together, while thunder cracked louder outside, rattling the dining room windows. Rain finally began falling hard against the glass. I watched my family sit there in silence, not guilty enough to stop them, just uncomfortable enough to stay quiet. That was somehow worse. Then Bradley muttered, mostly to himself, "She's throwing her life away." I stood so fast my chair legs scraped the hardwood. "No," I said. "She's discovering who actually loves her." My son looked stunned. Maybe because I'd never openly challenged him before. Not like that. Mothers from my generation were taught to smooth conflict over, not strike straight through it. But 71 years gives a woman perspective. And perspective has teeth. I grabbed my purse from the chair. Elaine blinked. "Celia, where are you going?" "With my granddaughter." "Mother, don't be ridiculous." "I'm not the ridiculous one in this room." Bradley stared at me. "You're seriously choosing this over your own family?" I looked him dead in the eye. "No, Bradley. I'm choosing the part of it that still has a soul. You could have heard rain breathing against the windows." Then Darlene muttered quietly, "This is getting out of hand." I turned toward her. No. What got out of hand was everybody at this table deciding prejudice sounds prettier when you dress it in concern. Portia scoffed. "Grandma, nobody's prejudiced." Then why was Matthew Collins never invited to prove himself? That shut her up instantly. I walked toward the foyer without waiting for another reply. By the time I reached the front door, Lena was standing under the covered porch, trying unsuccessfully not to cry, while Matteo searched for the car keys in the rain-dark driveway. The second she saw me coming, her face crumpled. "I'm sorry," she whispered immediately. "I didn't mean to ruin dinner." And that right there? That's what families like ours do to kind people. They teach them to apologize for being wounded. I stepped closer and held her face in both hands. "You listen to me carefully," I said. "The people who ruined tonight are still sitting in that dining room." Rain came down so hard the driveway looked like black glass. Matteo finally unlocked the Chevrolet and hurried toward us, already soaked through the shoulders. "Lena, come on," he said gently. "You're freezing." But she still stood there under Bradley's porch light, mascara running slightly, staring past me into the house where her family continued pretending dinner mattered more than dignity. And then something happened I never forgot. Bradley came to the doorway, not to apologize, not to stop her, to negotiate. "You're emotional right now," he said over the rain. "Everybody just needs time to cool off." Lena looked at him in disbelief. "You threatened to cut me out of the family." "I said things would change." "That's the same thing." Elaine appeared behind him with her arms folded tightly across her chest. Nobody threatened you, Lena. Oh, for heaven's sake, I snapped. You practically wrapped the threat in ribbon. Mateo stepped slightly in front of Lena then, not aggressively, instinctively. The way people protect things they truly love without even thinking about it. Bradley noticed, too, and somehow that irritated him more than yelling would have. You think playing hero solves this? He asked Mateo coldly. No, sir, Mateo answered calmly. But standing beside my wife will. Wife, not fiancé, not girlfriend. He said it like the decision had already settled inside him permanently. I saw Lena look at him then with that stunned expression people get when they realize somebody's love is sturdier than their fear. Bradley exhaled sharply. You're not married yet. Mateo didn't blink. That's not changing. The thunder cracked so loud overhead, Elaine flinched. And honestly, that storm felt earned. Lena wiped at her face angrily. You know what hurts most? I kept defending all of you to him. Nobody asked you to, Portia called from somewhere behind the hallway. I turned so fast I nearly slipped on the wet porch. That enough from you, I said sharply. Portia looked stunned. I'd never spoken to her like that before. But I was done watching cruelty masquerade as confidence. Then Bradley made one last attempt to regain control. If you leave tonight, he said carefully, don't expect us to keep funding irresponsible decisions. There it was again. Money as a leash. Only this time, something changed in Lena's face. Not weakness, not heartbreak, recognition. Like she was finally seeing the machinery underneath the family she grew up loving. Mateo reached for her hand. We'll figure it out. Bradley actually laughed. With what? Kitchen wages? I watched Lena straighten slowly beside him. You know what's funny? She said quietly. You all keep talking like he's beneath us. Nobody answered. But Mateo works harder than anyone at your table. Silence. Rain hammered against the porch roof. He works 16-hour shifts. He sends money to his parents even when he's exhausted. He never once asked me to choose between him and my family. Her voice shook slightly. Meanwhile, all of you made your love conditional before dessert. That one hit clean. Even Elaine looked away. I stepped forward before anybody could twist the moment again. Lena, I said calmly, where are you staying tonight? She blinked. Our apartment? The little brick place on Rutledge? Mateo nodded carefully. Yes, ma'am. Good. I grabbed my purse tighter. I'm coming with you. Everybody started talking at once after that. Mother, don't be absurd. Grandma, it's pouring rain. Celia, stop escalating this. I ignored all of them. Because for the first time all evening, my path felt perfectly clear. At 71, clarity arrives differently. You stop worrying about appearing reasonable to unreasonable people. Lena stared at me. Grandma, you don't have to do that. Yes, I said softly. I do. Mateo looked genuinely alarmed. Ms. Renmore, we don't want to drag you into— You didn't drag me anywhere, I interrupted. I walked. That shut everybody up. The ride downtown took almost 40 minutes because of the storm. Water flooded parts of Meeting Street. Neon signs blurred across the windshield. And the old Chevrolet smelled faintly like cinnamon from the bakery box, sitting unopened in the back seat. Nobody spoke much at first. Lena kept staring out the passenger window, while Mateo drove carefully through the rain. I sat in the back seat watching both of them quietly. Young, exhausted, trying very hard not to fall apart in front of each other. Finally, I asked, "How bad is it financially?" Mateo glanced at Lena before answering. "We're okay for now," which usually means not okay. Lena sighed softly. "Dad pays part of my tuition account directly, if he freezes it." "We'll figure it out," Mateo repeated. But this time, even he sounded tired. We finally pulled up outside their apartment building near Rutledge Avenue. Tiny brick units packed shoulder to shoulder beside a narrow taqueria and an old laundromat glowing fluorescent blue through the rain. The staircase creaked when we climbed it. Inside, the apartment was painfully small. One narrow couch, a tiny kitchen, mismatched mugs drying beside the sink, a crooked shelf stacked with cookbooks and old culinary notebooks filled with handwritten recipes. And yet somehow it felt warmer than Bradley's entire house. Mateo apologized immediately. "Sorry it's cramped." "It's honest," I answered. That boy looked at me strangely after I said that, like nobody had ever called his life honest before. Lena finally sat down at the little kitchen table and broke completely. Not loudly, just quietly covering her face with both hands while years of disappointment finally caught up to her. And while Charleston rain rattled those tiny apartment windows, I realized something sitting there beside her. My family thought they were punishing Lena for who she married. They had no idea they'd just pushed her toward the best thing that would ever happen to her. Lena cried for maybe 3 minutes. Not dramatic sobbing, not collapsing onto the floor like television nonsense. Just the kind of exhausted crying that comes from finally realizing something you spent years trying not to believe. Mateo never rushed her. That mattered to me. Some people panic when others hurt. They try to silence tears quickly because discomfort embarrasses them. But Mateo simply pulled out a chair beside her and rested his hand against her back while rain tapped softly against the apartment windows. "I'm sorry," Lena whispered again. And I immediately said, "Stop apologizing for other people's ugliness." She looked up at me with red eyes. "I really thought if they spent enough time with him, they'd eventually love him too." Mateo gave a tired smile. "I was aiming for tolerate first." That actually made her laugh weakly. The apartment kitchen smelled faintly of garlic, coffee grounds, and fresh lime. On the counter sat a cutting board covered with handwritten notes beside a bowl of dried guajillo peppers. Through the cracked doorway, I could see stacks of culinary textbooks, unpaid envelopes, and a tiny cactus dying bravely on the windowsill. Real life. Hard life, but real. I walked slowly around the apartment while they settled down. There was a small framed photograph near the sink that caught my attention. Lena and Mateo standing beside a food stall somewhere, both wearing stained aprons and laughing at something outside the frame. Happy, not performative happy like Bradley's dining room. Actual happy. "You built this place together?" I asked. Mateo nodded. "Mostly from thrift stores and Facebook Marketplace." "The couch was $20, Lena added quietly. "And smells slightly like cigarettes," Mateo admitted. "Only slightly." Another tiny laugh escaped her. "Good." I wanted sound back in the room besides heartbreak. Then my eyes landed on a thick notebook sitting near the stove. The cover read, "Salcedo Family Recipes." Mateo noticed me looking at it and immediately stood. "Would you like to see?" The way he asked surprised me. Not possessive. Proud. He opened the notebook carefully, like it was something sacred. Inside were handwritten recipes in both Spanish and English, little oil stains across the pages, notes in different inks from different years. "Me mama writes adjustments in the margins," he explained. "If she gets angry at a recipe, she insults it in Spanish." I laughed despite myself. Then he pointed at one page. "This one almost got me fired once." Lena smiled instantly. "Because you put cinnamon in the stock." "It worked eventually." It absolutely did not. Watching them together in that tiny kitchen, teasing each other beside secondhand furniture and overdue bills, I felt something ugly loosen inside my chest. Because suddenly, Bradley's giant polished dining room looked incredibly small in comparison. Mateo closed the notebook carefully. "I know tonight was hard." "That's one word for it," I muttered. He hesitated before speaking again. "I don't want Lena losing her family because of me." Now that sentence irritated me, not because it was wrong. Because good people always blame themselves first. I looked directly at him. "This didn't happen because of you." He stayed quiet. So I continued. "It happened because some people only enjoy control when they can disguise it as concern." Lena stared down at the table. Then softly, almost embarrassed, she asked, "Do you think Dad really meant it about cutting me off?" I didn't lie to her. "Yes." The apartment went silent. Even the rain seemed quieter after that. Lena closed her eyes briefly, like hearing it aloud hurt worse than suspecting it. Mateo reached for her hand again. Then we adjust. No panic. No macho promises. Just we adjust. That boy had steadiness in him. Rare steadiness. And right there in that cramped little apartment with peeling paint near the windows and a refrigerator humming too loudly, I made a decision nobody else knew yet. If my family planned to abandon Lena for building a future with this man, then I would help them build it anyway. I barely slept that night. Not because of the tiny apartment. Honestly, I'd slept in worse places during hurricane evacuations back in the 80s. No. What kept me awake was the memory of Bradley's face when he realized I'd walked out with Lena. Not sadness, not regret. Offense. As if loyalty belonged to him by default. Around 6 in the morning, I heard movement in the kitchen. The apartment smelled faintly of coffee and toasted cinnamon bread. I wrapped my cardigan tighter and stepped out quietly. Mateo stood at the stove making breakfast in near darkness so he wouldn't wake Lena. The boy was already dressed for work. "You sleep at all?" I asked. He smiled tiredly. "Little." On the stove simmered a small pan of something red and fragrant. "What's that?" "Chilaquiles? Comfort food." "Well, after last night, I'll take industrial quantities." That earned a real laugh from him. He moved efficiently around the tiny kitchen, careful not to make noise. Watching him cook reminded me of old jazz pianists. Calm hands, no wasted movement, everything instinctive. Meanwhile, my own son probably considered warming soup a survival skill. "I mean this respectfully," Mateo said while crumbling queso fresco over the dish. "But your family really hates me." I appreciated the honesty. "They hate losing control," I answered. "You're simply the first person Lena loved more than their approval." He looked down for a second before quietly admitting, "I kept trying to win them over." "I know. I thought if I worked harder, dressed right, stayed polite enough. You can't earn humanity from people determined not to give it. That sat between us heavily. Then Lena shuffled into the kitchen wearing oversized gray sweatpants and one of Mateo's old college shirts. Her eyes were swollen from crying, but the second she smelled breakfast, she blinked in surprise. "You made chilaquiles?" "You looked emotionally unstable," Mateo answered. "That's fair." For the first time since dinner, she almost looked like herself again. We ate together at the tiny kitchen table while morning rain dripped steadily outside the windows. The food was incredible. Smoky salsa, crisp tortillas softening underneath eggs, fresh crema, little slices of avocado arranged carefully even though money was obviously tight. That detail stuck with me too. People who still create beauty while struggling usually become dangerous in the best possible way. Then Lena's phone buzzed. The entire mood changed instantly. She looked at the screen and froze. "Dad." Mateo stopped eating. "You don't have to answer," he said gently. But she already looked exhausted from avoiding reality. So she picked up. "Hello?" I could hear Bradley's voice immediately, even across the table. Sharp. Controlled. Angry in that polished way wealthy men become when they think emotions lower their status. "You embarrassed us last night." Not hello. Not "are you okay?" That. Lena stared at the table silently for a moment. "You threatened to cut me off." "I told you actions have consequences." "And humiliating your daughter doesn't?" Mateo quietly reached for her free hand under the table. Bradley kept talking. "Your grandfather's trust distribution is frozen until further notice." There it was, the official punishment. Lena shut her eyes briefly. "You're seriously doing this?" "I'm trying to stop you from making a catastrophic mistake." At that point, I'd heard enough. I held out my hand. "Give me the phone." Lena hesitated, then handed it over. "Bradley," I said calmly. Silence on the other end. Then, "Mother." "You really woke up this morning and decided financial blackmail was the right direction?" "You're only hearing her side." "No," I replied. "I watched your side at dinner." His tone hardened instantly. This family's falling apart because nobody's willing to say difficult truths. No, darling. It's falling apart because some truths are rotten. He exhaled sharply. "You're choosing them over your own son." I looked across the little kitchen at Lena and Mateo, sitting shoulder to shoulder beside chipped mugs and unpaid bills. And suddenly, I realized something. Nobody at Bradley's giant polished dining table had looked at each other the way these two did. Not once. "I'm choosing decency," I answered. Then I hung up on him. The silence after I hung up on Bradley felt strangely peaceful. Not happy, not victorious, just clear. Lena stared at me across the kitchen table like she still couldn't fully believe what had happened. I understood that look. When people spend years trapped inside conditional love, genuine support feels suspicious at first, like there must be hidden terms buried somewhere underneath it. Mateo broke the silence carefully. "You didn't have to do that for us." "Yes," I said, reaching for my coffee again. "I did." Outside, Charleston morning traffic had begun waking up. Delivery trucks rattled past the apartment windows. Somewhere downstairs, somebody cursed loudly in Spanish while dragging crates into the taqueria next door. The building smelled faintly of rainwater, fried onions, and detergent from the laundromat below. Real people smells. I preferred them to Bradley's imported candles. Lena finally looked down at the table. He froze the trust. I heard. That money was supposed to help us open something someday. Mateo immediately shook his head. We can still do it. She gave him a tired smile. With what? Your kitchen paychecks and my flower shop shifts? With stubbornness. That actually made me laugh, and maybe that was the moment the idea first took root. Not fully formed yet. Just a flicker. Because I looked around that tiny apartment at the recipe notebooks, the culinary textbooks stacked beside overdue utility notices, the way Mateo instinctively plated even breakfast beautifully despite exhaustion. And I realized these two didn't lack talent. They lacked runway. That was different. Around noon, I finally headed home to collect a few things. Lena insisted she was fine. Mateo insisted even harder. But when I pulled into my driveway, I sat in the car for nearly 5 minutes, staring at my own house. Everything suddenly looked older. Not in a tragic way, just honest. The porch swing Harlan built 20 years ago creaked crooked now. The blue shutters needed repainting. The gardenias along the walkway had overgrown wildly because my knees weren't what they used to be. But it was still mine. And unlike Bradley's polished little kingdom, every inch of it carried memory instead of performance. The second I stepped inside, my phone began ringing again. Elaine, ignored. Then Portia, ignored faster. Then Darlene left a voicemail dramatic enough to qualify for community theater. Celia, people are talking about last night. Good. Let them. I made myself tea, sat in Harlan's old leather chair, and finally opened the financial folder tucked inside the secretary desk near the hallway. Now let me explain something important. My husband was many things. Stubborn, impossible during football season, capable of burning scrambled eggs somehow. But Harlan Renmore understood land better than banks ever would. Years ago, before Charleston property exploded in value, he'd quietly purchased an old freight warehouse near the rail district by Morrison Drive. Back then, the area was half abandoned. Rusted loading docks, broken brick buildings, stray cats big enough to pay taxes. Bradley always hated the property. Waste of maintenance money, he called it. After Harlan died, Bradley pushed me 3 separate times to sell it. I never did. Something about the place felt unfinished. I pulled the property documents from the folder slowly. Taxes paid, ownership clean, still legally mine. And suddenly, that flicker from breakfast became something larger. By evening, I drove back downtown with a grocery bag full of fresh produce, smoked sausage, and a lemon chess pie from a bakery Lena loved as a teenager. When Mateo opened the apartment door, he looked surprised. You came back? Well, yes, I said dryly. I wasn't migrating south for winter. That boy laughed easier than most people despite everything. Good sign. Inside, Lena sat cross-legged on the floor surrounded by papers. Budget sheets, tuition statements, handwritten calculations. She looked up immediately, embarrassed. I was trying to figure out what we can cut. I handed her the pie first. Start by cutting panic. Then I sat down beside the papers. How much would it cost to open a small place? Both of them froze. Mateo blinked. A restaurant? Yes. Lena looked stunned. Grandma. I'm asking seriously. Mateo exchanged a glance with her before answering cautiously. Depends how small. How small can survive? Now his eyes sharpened slightly. That chef brain turning on despite himself. Well, if the kitchen equipment wasn't completely destroyed, and if we found a cheap lease? Not lease, I interrupted. They both looked confused. I slid the warehouse documents across the floor toward them. Lena frowned first. Wait. This address? The old rail building? Mateo asked quietly. I nodded. You own that? Unfortunately, yes. Which means I've also been paying taxes on a giant pigeon hotel for 12 years. Mateo stared at the paperwork, like he was afraid touching it might wake him up. That place is huge. It's filthy, I corrected. But the bones are good, he said instantly. That caught my attention. Not location, not resale value. Bones. He was already imagining the structure. Lena looked between us slowly. You can't seriously mean I'm 71 years old, I said. If not now, when exactly am I supposed to start making irresponsible decisions? For the first time all day, Lena smiled fully. And Lord, I'd missed that face. Mateo crouched beside the paperwork, already studying dimensions. The loading dock could become an outdoor patio. Lena leaned closer. And the brick walls are original Charleston red brick. The ceiling beams are salvageable. We could do open shelving. Maybe copper lighting? Industrial tables. Suddenly, they were talking over each other, animated, alive, forgetting heartbreak for 5 straight minutes while ideas bounced around that cramped apartment kitchen like sparks. I just sat there quietly watching. That's the thing people misunderstand about older women. By our 70s, we've usually figured out exactly when a dream is real. And sitting there, watching those two build a future out of nothing but exhaustion and imagination. I knew. The family dinner had not destroyed Lena's life. It had accidentally pushed her toward it. The next 6 months nearly killed us. Not metaphorically, literally. The warehouse looked romantic in imagination and absolutely cursed in reality. The first time we unlocked the rusted side doors together, a family of pigeons exploded from the rafters like we'd interrupted organized crime. Rain leaked through 3 places in the ceiling. Half the windows were boarded over. The old freight office smelled like mildew, motor oil, and dead summers. Lena stared at the space in silence. Mateo, meanwhile, looked around like a man entering church. The stove line could go there, he murmured immediately. There is no stove line, Lena replied. There will be. That boy had dangerous optimism, and somehow, against all logic, it infected the rest of us. We spent mornings clearing debris ourselves because contractors cost money we didn't have. Mateo hauled broken shelving out by hand after finishing 14-hour kitchen shifts downtown. Lena scrubbed brick walls until her fingers blistered raw. I sat on an overturned pickle barrel arguing with electricians and bribing exhausted workers with peach hand pies and cold cheerwine. The neighborhood thought we were insane. One afternoon, an old dock worker stopped outside the loading bay and shouted, "Y'all opening a restaurant or filming a murder documentary?" Depends on the plumbing inspection, I yelled back. Even Mateo laughed at that. But the pressure never really left. Every bill mattered. Every permit delay mattered. One failed inspection nearly wiped out our remaining savings because the city suddenly decided the ventilation system needed commercial modifications nobody warned us about earlier. Mateo spent an entire night at the warehouse with graph paper and a tape measure trying to redesign the kitchen himself. At 2 in the morning, I found him sitting alone on the loading dock, eating crackers from a vending machine pack. "You look terrible," I told him honestly. "Thank you." "You're welcome." He rubbed both hands over his face. "I don't want Lena seeing me panic." That sentence stayed with me. Not, "I'm panicking." I don't want her seeing it. I sat beside him carefully, my knees protesting immediately. "You know what my husband used to say during hard years?" I asked. Mateo shook his head. He said, "Fear gets expensive when people pretend not to share it." The rail yard behind the warehouse hummed softly in the dark. Somewhere farther down the tracks, somebody played trumpet badly enough to qualify as a public disturbance. Mateo stared out into the night. "What if your son was right?" Now that irritated me instantly. I turned toward him. "About what?" "That Lena's throwing away stability." I snorted. "Bradley thinks stability means expensive countertops and emotionally constipated dinner parties." That got a tired laugh out of him. Then I added more quietly, "You know what stable people don't do? Threaten their daughters over who they love." Silence settled again. Then Mateo admitted something I don't think he'd told anyone before. "My father worked construction after we came here, sometimes 16 hours a day." He stared down at his hands. "People talked to him like he was stupid because of his accent, so he started speaking less." That one hurt. "He told me once that some people only respect you after they can profit from you." I looked around the half-renovated warehouse, exposed brick, dangling wires, dust floating through sunlight from broken upper windows. Funny enough. That sentence turned out prophetic. About 3 months into renovations, the city suddenly became very interested in us. A licensing officer appeared twice in 1 week. A neighboring business owner filed complaints about noise before we'd even installed equipment. Somebody reported suspicious activity because workers stayed late painting walls. Charleston has old money problems. The kind people deny politely while enforcing them aggressively. One afternoon, Lena found "Go Home" spray painted across the back delivery entrance. She just stood there staring at it. Didn't cry, didn't scream. Honestly, that was worse. Mateo grabbed a bucket immediately. "I'll clean it." But Lena suddenly snapped, "No, I'm tired." Her voice cracked hard enough to echo through the warehouse. "I'm tired of proving we belong everywhere." Nobody moved. Then she sat down, right there on the dusty floor beside paint cans, and covered her face with both hands. And that was the moment I realized success wouldn't save her from the wound her family left behind. Because when people reject you long enough, eventually the rejection starts sounding like your own thoughts. I'll tell you honestly, watching people attack someone who's simply trying to build a life says more about the attackers than the target. If I were Celia, I'd remember every face standing silent too. I walked over to the wall slowly, picked up the scrub brush myself, and started cleaning. The next morning, I came back with extra brushes, industrial cleaner, and enough spite to power a small country. Lena was already there, wearing old jeans and one of Mateo's oversized kitchen hoodies, staring at the half-cleaned wall with swollen eyes. Mateo stood beside a ladder, replacing light fixtures, like he hadn't slept at all. Nobody mentioned the graffiti immediately. That's another thing older people learn. Sometimes dignity means continuing anyway. I dipped the brush into the cleaning solution and started scrubbing again. The paint bled slowly down the brick in ugly gray streaks. After a minute, Mateo climbed down from the ladder and quietly took another brush. Then Lena grabbed one too. No speeches, no inspirational nonsense, just work. Around noon, something unexpected happened. A pickup truck rolled slowly into the loading lot, then another. For a second, I thought trouble had come back. Instead, an older woman stepped out carrying foil trays balanced in both hands. I recognized her immediately. Señora Inés Villalba. She owned the tiny Mexican grocery 3 blocks over, the one with hanging piñatas in the window and jars of tamarind candy behind the counter. Tiny woman, sharp eyes, always smelled faintly of cinnamon and cloves. She looked at the wall once, then at Mateo. "My nephew told me what happened," she said simply. Before anybody could answer, 2 younger men climbed from the second truck, carrying paint rollers and toolboxes. "We brought food too," one said. And just like that, the day changed. By 2 o'clock, there were 7 people helping, not out of charity, out of recognition. A retired black carpenter named Wallace Reed fixed 2 warped support beams for free because, according to him, the city already got enough ugly, empty buildings. A college girl from the art district painted over damaged sections near the patio entrance while blasting old Celia Cruz music through a dusty speaker. At one point, I stood near the loading dock eating tamales out of foil while watching strangers rebuild something my own family tried to crush. Funny world. Mateo walked over beside me carrying cold bottles of Jarritos soda. "I don't know how to thank people for this." "You build something worth returning to," I answered. He looked around the warehouse quietly. The place was transforming now. Slowly, stubbornly, beautifully. The old brick walls had been cleaned enough to glow warm under afternoon light. Copper pendant lamps hung above unfinished tables Mateo and Wallace built from reclaimed wood. Lena had started arranging little pots of marigolds near the front windows because she said, bright flowers made empty spaces feel less lonely. That sentence nearly broke me all over again. Around sunset, Lena climbed onto the small, temporary stage near the future dining area to test sightlines for live music nights. I watched her turn slowly beneath strings of unfinished lights. For the first time since that dinner at Bradley's house, she looked excited about the future instead of afraid of it. Then her phone rang. The mood shifted instantly. She looked at the screen and sighed. Portia. Mateo immediately looked wary. "You don't have to answer," he said. But Lena already swiped the call open. "What?" Even from several feet away, I could hear Portia's voice sharp through the speaker. "So it's true?" Lena frowned. "What's true?" "That Grandma's wasting her money helping you open some warehouse taco place." The entire warehouse seemed to go quiet. People kept working, but slower now. Listening. Lena looked down briefly before answering. "It's a restaurant." Portia laughed. "Oh my God, you're actually serious about this." Mateo stiffened beside the paint table. Lena's voice cooled instantly. "Why did you call?" "Dad's furious. Grandma's draining family assets for your little rebellion project." I stepped closer without meaning to. Rebellion project. That's what they called her future now. Lena stared across the warehouse at all the people helping rebuild it. Sanding wood, wiring lights, carrying boxes, laughing through exhaustion. Then she answered quietly, "You know what's funny, Portia?" "What?" "The only people treating this like family aren't related to us." Silence. Then Portia scoffed. "You really think these people are your family now?" Lena looked at Mateo, then at Señora Villalba, arguing affectionately with Wallace over paint colors, then at me. And when she answered, her voice no longer sounded uncertain. "No," she said softly. "I know they are." Marigold Table opened on a Thursday in late September with 12 tables, crooked parking lines, and exactly $43 left in the business account. I remember because Mateo checked the balance 3 separate times, like maybe the number would magically improve from fear alone. The sign outside still smelled like fresh paint. Marigold Table by Lena Salcedo. The surname sat there in gold lettering against dark green wood, visible from half the block. Salcedo, not Ashford, not Renmore. And somehow, that mattered more than any of us admitted aloud. The first hour after opening was brutal. Nobody came. Well, technically one man entered, looked around at the exposed brick and handwritten menu, asked if they served hamburgers, then left after Mateo said no. Lena pretended not to care. She reorganized silverware 6 times in 20 minutes. At noon, 2 college girls wandered in because they thought the patio looked cute on Instagram. One ordered pozole. The other mispronounced queso 3 different ways before finally pointing at the menu with surrender in her eyes. Mateo cooked like their lives depended on it. Honestly, maybe they did. I watched from my corner table near the front window while Lena floated anxiously between tables, pretending confidence she didn't yet feel. The restaurant smelled incredible already. Roasted peppers, fresh lime, simmering stock, warm tortillas hitting cast iron. Real food smells, not decorative food. Food that wanted people to stay. The college girls loved it enough to post pictures online before leaving. By 3 o'clock, 3 more tables arrived, then 5. By dinner, the tiny dining room buzzed softly with conversation and clinking glasses under copper pendant lights. Mateo nearly electrocuted himself installing. And for one dangerous moment, hope entered the building. Then reality returned. The fryer broke at 7:40. A server dropped an entire tray of shrimp and grits onto table 6, and one man in a golf polo loudly asked Lena if the kitchen had real cooks back there or just family recipes. I watched Mateo hear that from the pass window. He didn't react. Didn't even pause plating. But I saw the muscle jump once in his jaw. Lena answered before I could. "The chef trained under Rafael Alvarez," she said calmly. "But if you prefer frozen chain food, Charleston has options." That nearly made me choke laughing into my sweet tea. The man left no tip. Good riddance. Around closing time, only 1 table remained occupied. An older woman sat there alone near the patio doors, quietly eating mole poblano, with tears running down her face. At first, Lena panicked. "Oh my God! Something's wrong with the food!" But the woman shook her head immediately. "No, no." She pressed a napkin to her eyes. "It tastes like my mother's kitchen in Puebla." Mateo froze completely still behind the counter. The woman smiled through tears. "I haven't tasted this in 22 years. Silence settled over the restaurant. Not awkward silence. Sacred silence. Then she pointed slowly toward the kitchen. "Who taught you?" "My mama," Mateo answered quietly. The woman nodded like she understood something invisible. Then she ordered 3 more dishes to take home. Her name was Teresa Calderon, and by the following week she brought 9 people with her. That's how it started. Not with critics, not with investors, with one homesick woman crying into mole sauce. Within months, Marigold Table became the kind of place people described emotionally instead of financially. The roasted corn soup tastes like somebody's grandmother actually loves you. You can smell the cinnamon from the sidewalk. They remember your name. Little things, important things. But success made certain people suddenly remember Lena existed again. Funny how that works. One afternoon, nearly a year after opening, I walked into the restaurant carrying fresh peaches from a roadside stand and found Elaine sitting at table 4, wearing sunglasses large enough to hide a criminal record. Lena stood frozen beside her. Mateo looked like he'd rather wrestle a bear. Elaine removed the sunglasses slowly when she saw me. Celia. I set the peach basket down carefully. Well, I said, either hell froze over or you finally got hungry. Elaine ignored that. Her eyes moved around the packed restaurant. Full tables, laughing customers, servers weaving through warm light and music. Success. Visible success. And I recognized the look on her face instantly. Not pride, calculation. Elaine stayed for almost 2 hours that afternoon, not because Lena invited her to, because she was studying the place. I noticed it immediately. Her eyes kept moving. The packed lunch crowd, the polished copper bar shelves, the waiting list near the hostess stand, the open kitchen where customers could see Mateo working with terrifying calm under pressure. Every few minutes, another table complimented the food loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. Success has a smell to certain people. And Elaine had finally caught it. What's the average nightly revenue? She asked casually, while stirring hibiscus tea she barely touched. Lena blinked at her. Excuse me? I'm just curious. No, I said from across the table. You're just nosy. Elaine ignored me smoothly. This area is growing fast. If you expanded properly, investors would probably be interested. There it was. Not, I'm proud of you. Not, I was wrong. Business. Always business. Mateo approached the table carrying fresh conchas dusted lightly with cinnamon sugar. He placed the plate down politely, despite clearly wanting to launch himself into the Atlantic Ocean. On the house, he said evenly. Elaine gave him the same smile people use with hotel staff. Well, you certainly learned presentation. The entire table went cold. Lena slowly set down her glass. What does that mean? Elaine blinked innocently. It was a compliment. No, Lena replied quietly. It wasn't. Around us, the restaurant hummed with life. Forks clinking against plates, low jazz floating from the speakers, somebody near the patio laughing loud enough to turn heads. And sitting there, watching Elaine perform civility inside the business she once treated like humiliation, made something ugly rise in my chest again. Then Elaine leaned forward slightly. Your father worries you're overworking yourselves. Mateo almost laughed at that. The sound escaped before he could stop it. Elaine's eyes snapped toward him immediately. Something funny? Yes, Mateo answered calmly. The concern arrived 7 years late. Lord. I nearly applauded right there beside the tortilla warmer. Elaine stiffened instantly. Nobody's trying to fight. No, Lena said softly. You just arrived talking like this place accidentally happened to us. Silence. Then Elaine finally dropped the performance a little. You have to understand how difficult this was for your father. I stared at her in disbelief. Difficult, I repeated. Yes. Elaine. Bradley threatened his daughter financially because she married a Mexican man. He never said it like that. Bigots rarely do, I answered. That landed hard enough to make her flinch. For a second, nobody spoke. Then something shifted near the entrance. A black luxury SUV had just pulled up outside the restaurant windows, and when Bradley stepped out onto the sidewalk, dressed in one of those expensive navy jackets he wore whenever he wanted the world to take him seriously, I felt Lena go still beside me. He hadn't come alone. Portia followed behind him carrying designer sunglasses and superiority-like matching accessories. Behind them walked a silver-haired man in an expensive charcoal suit I recognized vaguely from Charleston business circles. Investor type. Ah, now I understood. Elaine saw me realize it too, and for the first time since arriving, she looked nervous. They're having dinner with a developer, she admitted carefully. Of course they are. The front doors opened. Warm restaurant noise drifted outward onto the street, and Bradley Ashford walked into the business he once called a mistake, wearing the expression of a man expecting excellent service. He noticed Lena first, then Mateo, then me, and I swear to God. For one full second, that man looked afraid. Not guilty. Afraid. Because suddenly the power dynamic had changed completely. This wasn't his dining room anymore. This was theirs. The hostess almost rushed forward automatically when Bradley entered. Then she recognized him from the tension radiating off our table and wisely disappeared toward the kitchen instead. Smart girl. Bradley stopped just inside the restaurant doors, taking in the packed dining room around him. Polished wood tables glowing beneath amber lights, servers weaving through crowded aisles, laughter rising from the patio, the smell of smoked peppers and butter drifting through the air. Success. Public success. The kind nobody could dismiss anymore. Portia removed her sunglasses slowly. Wow, she muttered despite herself. Not warmth, not admiration, shock. Because the tiny warehouse taco place they mocked 7 years earlier had become one of the busiest restaurants in Charleston. The older investor beside Bradley looked impressed immediately. This place is beautiful, he said. Mateo nodded politely. Thank you. Then Bradley made the mistake of trying to regain control too quickly. Well, he said stiffly, looks like things worked out after all. I nearly laughed in his face. Worked out. Like prosperity had simply wandered in by accident while they stood nearby, offering support instead of sabotage. Lena stayed calm, though. Terrifyingly calm. Yes, she answered evenly. Eventually. The investor extended his hand toward Mateo first. Martin Kells. Mateo shook it firmly. Mateo Salcedo. No hesitation now, no discomfort saying the name. I watched Bradley notice that too. Interesting how confidence changes pronunciation in wealthy circles. Martin glanced around the restaurant again. I've heard about this place for months. Impossible reservations. Thought people were exaggerating. They usually are, Lena replied. That got a genuine laugh from him. Bradley looked irritated immediately. Because charisma is harder to control than money. A server approached quietly beside me. Miss Lena, Table 7 asked if the mole recipe came from your husband's family again. Lena smiled instantly. Tell them yes, and bring them extra tortillas. The server hurried off. Martin watched the exchange carefully. You built quite a reputation here. Before Lena could answer, Portia jumped in smoothly. She always was stubborn. Funny word, stubborn. Families use it whenever determination embarrasses them. Then Elaine finally stood from table 4 and joined the group, pretending none of the previous 7 years existed. "We were actually hoping to have dinner tonight," she announced lightly. Not asking, announcing, still expecting access by default. Lena folded her hands calmly in front of her apron. "We're fully booked." Portia blinked. "Seriously?" "Yes." Bradley glanced around the restaurant. "Surely you can make room for family." That word hit the table strangely. Family. After 7 years of silence. After frozen trust accounts. After skipped holidays. After pretending Lena had disappeared. I saw Mateo tense slightly beside her but stay quiet. Smart man, because Lena handled it herself. "We do keep one emergency table open," she said evenly. Relief flickered across Bradley's face too quickly. Then she added, "But usually for people who actually supported us." Lord have mercy. Even I felt that one. The investor looked sharply between all of us now. He wasn't stupid. Rich men survive decades in business by smelling tension faster than smoke. Bradley forced a laugh. "Still holding grudges, huh?" Now that changed something in Lena's face. Not anger, finality. "You threatened to financially cut me out of the family because I married him." The restaurant noise around us suddenly seemed quieter. Not silent, but listening. Bradley lowered his voice immediately. "This isn't the place." "No," Lena agreed softly. "That conversation should have happened 7 years ago." Portia crossed her arms. "Dad was trying to protect you." "From what?" Nobody answered. Again. Always again. Martin Kells slowly removed his glasses. "I feel like I walked into the middle of something." "You did," I answered calmly. Elaine shot me a warning glance. Too late for warnings. I stood slowly from my chair near the window and looked directly at Martin. 7 years ago, this family cut Lena off after she married Mateo. Tonight, they walked into her restaurant without even recognizing her name on the sign outside. Martin's eyebrows rose immediately. I continued before anybody interrupted. They told themselves they were protecting family standards. Funny thing about standards, though, eventually life asks whether you actually deserve them. Bradley's face darkened instantly. "Mother!" "No," I said sharply. "You don't get to manage this conversation anymore." Portia looked mortified now because nearby tables had absolutely started paying attention. Good. Let discomfort breathe a little. Elaine stepped closer to Lena, lowering her voice again. "Can we please discuss this privately?" Mateo finally spoke. "No, ma'am. Privacy seems to be where everybody rewrites history." Damn. That boy learned restraint and precision from Kitchens. Every sentence plated perfectly. Then something happened I didn't expect. Martin looked directly at Lena and asked quietly, "Is everything she said true?" The restaurant held its breath, and Lena answered without blinking. "Yes." Nobody spoke for several seconds after Lena answered. Not Bradley, not Elaine, not even Portia. The restaurant kept moving around us, servers carrying trays, silverware clinking softly, somebody laughing near the patio, but our little corner felt suspended outside of time. Martin Kells looked at Bradley slowly. And rich men like Martin didn't survive decades in business without learning how to recognize panic hidden beneath expensive jackets. "You told me your daughter moved away years ago," he said carefully. Bradley swallowed once. "It's complicated." "No," Lena replied quietly. "It really isn't." The investor's eyes shifted toward Mateo. "And they objected to the marriage?" Again, nobody answered except silence itself. That was enough. Martin removed his glasses fully now, folding them in one hand while studying the room around him. The packed tables, the waiting list by the entrance, the customers greeting Lena by name, the visible respect people had for Mateo in the kitchen. Then he asked the question that finally cracked Bradley's composure. "You tried to stop this?" Bradley exhaled sharply. "I had concerns." "About what?" There it was again. The question nobody in this family could answer honestly without exposing themselves. Portia stepped in too fast. "Dad was worried about stability." Martin looked around the restaurant. "This doesn't look unstable." Nobody had anything left to say after that. I watched Bradley's face carefully then, not because I enjoyed humiliating him. Despite everything, he was still my son. And somewhere underneath the arrogance and control and prejudice, I could still see flashes of the little boy who once cried because another child excluded him from a birthday party. That was the tragedy of it. People who suffer cruelty sometimes become experts at reproducing it. Elaine finally spoke, her voice lower now, less polished. "We made mistakes." Lena looked at her for a very long time. "You erased me." That landed harder than yelling ever could. Mateo reached for Lena's hand quietly beneath the hostess stand. Martin looked uncomfortable now, not because truth bothered him, because witnessing consequences usually does. "I think," he said carefully, "I should probably give the family a moment." But Lena surprised all of us. "No," she said calmly. "Stay." Bradley frowned. "Lena, no. You spent years pretending this story didn't happen. Tonight you can sit in it." The restaurant noise seemed louder suddenly, life continuing all around, people finally forced to confront themselves. Then Bradley did something I honestly never expected. He looked at Mateo directly. Not through him, not around him, at him, and quietly said, "I was wrong." Nobody moved. Even Mateo looked stunned. But Lena didn't, because some wounds arrived too deep for one sentence to fix. "I thought—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "I thought I was protecting the family." "You were protecting your image," I answered softly. "And for once." He didn't argue. Portia looked shaken now too, though pride still fought visibly across her face. Elaine finally lowered herself into a chair near the wall, like her legs gave out. The investor glanced toward the dining room again, awkwardly. "I should leave." Mateo surprised me then. "No," he said evenly. "You came here for dinner. You should eat." Martin blinked. "After all this—" Mateo gave a tired little shrug. "Food's still good." That broke the tension just enough for somebody at a nearby table to laugh softly. And suddenly, the entire room breathed again. Lena looked at the hostess stand. "Open the emergency table." Bradley blinked. "You don't have to do that." "I know," she answered. "Important difference. The table they got wasn't the best one in the house. That belonged to regulars who earned it years ago. Instead, they sat near the center beneath the marigold lights, while servers brought mole, grilled snapper, warm tortillas, and roasted corn soup to the same people who once mocked the idea of Mexican food becoming part of the family. Funny world. I watched them eat quietly, not magically healed, not transformed overnight into perfect people, just uncomfortable enough to finally see clearly. And maybe that was more honest than forgiveness. About an hour later, Bradley approached my table alone while Lena and Mateo worked the dinner rush together. The restaurant glowed around them now, busy, alive, built. "I don't know how to fix this," he admitted quietly. For the first time in years, he sounded like someone's son instead of someone's authority figure. I stirred my tea slowly before answering. "You start by understanding something." He nodded faintly. "You didn't lose Lena when she married Mateo." I looked across the restaurant at my granddaughter laughing softly while Mateo plated desserts beside her. "You lost her the moment you made love conditional." Bradley looked down. And at 71 years old, I finally understood something too. Family isn't the people who demand your loyalty while withholding dignity. Family is the people who sit beside you in tiny apartments during storms, scrub hateful words off brick walls, and build futures with you, even when success still looks impossible. Grace here, folks. I'll tell you straight. If I were Celia, I wouldn't pretend 7 years never happened. Respect matters. The moment someone makes you earn basic humanity, something's already broken. But I do believe people can change if they finally face what they've become. And you? Would you have let Bradley sit at that table after everything? Let me know below. And if this story stayed with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stick around for the next one.